Hello, everyone. This week, we are going to cover the second part of resistance training specific to program design. So, before we begin, I want to recall a few things that we learned the last day. And we defined what anaerobic training is. And this is really high intensity intermittent movements. And it really comprises multiple aspects of performance, including strength, power, plyometrics, speed, and quickness training. And so this is going to be the focus for the next few weeks. So I want to bring you back to this slide, which is the overview of anaerobic adaptations. And I really want you to understand that you get how you train. So there is specificity of the prescription drives the adaptation. So the stress that you impose on the body will dictate the adaptation. So you need to be very specific to your desired outcome. So if you want to be fast, you need to train fast. If you want to be slow, you train slow. If you want to have quick reactions, you need to train for quick reactions. So you really need to understand the physiology that underpins anaerobic adaptations. And those two major systems that we talked about that drive all other adaptations relevant to anaerobic adaptations is that of the speed of the contraction, which is the nervous system, and the speed that energy is needed, which is metabolism. So remember, the stress on the body dictates how the body will adapt. And this is why it is very important to be fresh when you train anaerobically. Because if you are fatigued, then you will not be able to get to the intensity or have the stressor on the body needed to drive the adaptation. And this is what I term monotony of training. I see this all the time in athlete populations where there's a high volume of training. You could be training 15 to 20 hours plus a week. And so without a proper gauge of fatigue and freshness, the coach might continually push for intensity and volume training where the athlete can only do this submaximally. And so everything you're doing day after day after day, you're not getting that high intensity needed to drive change. Instead, you're training at a submaximal intensity. And so you're not going to see large gains in performance. You're going to see small gains in performance, if not any gains in performance. So this is really important. This comes back to very old school ideas about training, where high volume training is really important. And this is chronic across lots of team sports and even in anaerobic based sports, when really it comes down to the quality of training. Are you getting the intensity put on the muscle, on the nervous system to get faster, to drive the changes that you want? So freshness is really important for anaerobic based adaptations. So I presented these last day, and I said that these are the two evidence-based ergogenic aids that have been shown to improve anaerobic performance. So the first one on the left, creatine monohydrate, really increases the creatine concentrations within the skeletal muscle to make more phosphocreatine. So this is the limiting factor to the ATP phosphocreatine system, is the amount of creatine that's there. And so this allows for more creatine concentration in the muscle that can then bind to a phosphate, creating phosphocreatine for the phosphocreatine ATP cycle. And this really provides that energy for that less than 15 seconds of max work. The other on the right is baking soda, also known as sodium bicarbonate. And this is an alkalizing agent. And really what it does is you take the supplement right before anaerobic-based event, you load the body, the blood specifically, with sodium bicarbonate. And this helps to minimize the change in pH of the blood, which helps delay fatigue during high-intensity exercise when hydrogen ions are building up in the blood and there's lots of CO2 production. So there's this direct relationship between CO2 production and the drop in pH in the blood. And so if you can load the blood with something, an alkalizing agent that can increase the pH, then you can help neutralize the pH of the blood and prevent the negative consequences of becoming more acidic, which is drop in enzyme activity, etc. So these are the two evidence-based ergogenic aids, so performance-enhancing aids for anaerobic performance. There's so many on the market, but many of them you're going to waste your money and you're going to flush your money down the toilet because a lot of them you just pee out. But these two have been proven to actually have a significant effect. Today we're going to continue on where we left off last day before the midterm, and we're going to do part 2 of program design for resistance training. Specifically, we're going to look at evidence that suggests that resistance training has transferability to sport performance. We're also going to talk about the general goals of training. And thirdly, we're going to look at the principles of anaerobic exercise prescription that we did not cover in week 6. So we're going to look at training frequency, exercise order, training load and repetitions, volume, and rest periods in relation to resistance training. So before we get started, I want to recall the needs or the demands analysis. So this is that essential step that happens in consultation with your client. And then afterwards, where you're investigating the sport and the needs placed on the individual based on the feedback they provided you in your initial consultation. So you need to determine if resistance training or anaerobic strength training will, 1, improve their tasks of everyday life, 2, their overall health and well-being, and thirdly, will help improve their relative performance. So I say relative performance because you may be working with a geriatric population. So will resistance training or strength-based training or anaerobic-based training help improve all of these factors for that population? And it may help them get up the stairs easier with their groceries. It may help them rake their leaves in their yard. And those are things that you need to consider when you're considering their whole lifestyle. Alternatively, you may be working with an athlete, and it may be a football player versus an endurance athlete. So an endurance athlete may have high repetitions of a constant load, and so you need to train that individual differently than a football player who may be a linesman and have to push a 300-pound or 400-pound other individual for 10 seconds or less than that. So the way that you dictate strength training and anaerobic based training is based on the needs of your client, and you have to consider those 3 questions. If your clientele is the special population of athletes, then you need to consider if strength, power, quickness, reaction time, all of these things are a key performance factor or KPF for success in the sport. And if it's not, then anaerobic based training may not be a priority. However, if it is, then you would have to craft a plan that ensures that you're addressing the anaerobic components of that sport. Specifically, if it is strength, which is force, if it's power, which is force over time, if it's quickness and reaction time, coordination, balance, all of these things need to be considered. And that's where that needs analysis points to the priority of that training for that individual. So the question I always had, and it's a very valid question for many practitioners, is does strength training actually help improve sport performance? So I mentioned this in a previous lecture that it is strength and conditioning, but conditioning is the element that's so much more neglected than strength. However, the conditioning piece, anaerobic and aerobic conditioning, has greater transferability to sports performance than the strength component. However, the strength component is been given more priority. So when it comes down to this, you need to consider multiple factors. One is the program design, the specificity, and the periodization are critical components that contribute to the overall impact of a strength training program on athlete performance. Ultimately, you want to ensure that what you're doing in the gym or on the field anaerobically is transferring to improved system tolerance and capacity, reducing injuries, and improving performance in your client. And so what you want to do is ensure that your program is specific to the demands placed on them in a game to improve the transferability. So for example, if you're doing bicep curls for an endurance athlete, does that have good transferability to improve their performance? Well, not really, but it might help prevent an injury, an unknown injury that I know of anyways, in that population. So there has to be a reason, and you have to be able to provide a reason to your client for what you do and a reason to yourself for what you're doing to ensure that you're helping either preventing injuries, improving their system tolerance and capacity, and improving their performance in some way. Although there is not a direct transferability of anaerobic-based resistance training to athlete performance, there are things that resistance training does help with, and the first one being injury prevention. So the goal of resistance training should be really to aim to develop balance throughout the body, even if the activity has an upper or lower body emphasis. And this is an important step in injury prevention. For example, you want to target areas prone to injury. So for that sport, you need to research as a practitioner in your needs and demand analysis, what are common injuries for that sport? Well, those common injuries, those joints and ligaments and muscles surrounding those common injury sites should be areas that you want to strengthen. Okay, so that's the first goal of program design, is injury prevention. The second one is enhance the ability to tolerate the demands. So this is system capacity and structural tolerance. This is you're enhancing the body's ability to tolerate the demands of the sport. Okay, and I call this minimizing energy leaks. You want to minimize energy leaks by optimizing the system's capacity to tolerate and handle the load and stress of the exercise. And lastly is enhanced performance, and that's really the cherry on the top of the cake, so to speak, or the ice cream sundae. That you want these two, number one and number two, to line up so that we see a greater transferability to enhance performance. And that really is the goal of anaerobic resistance training program design. I'm going to give you an example of what I mean by energy leak and minimizing energy leaks. I had the privilege of working with the Canadian time trial champion for road cycling in preparation for the 2016 Rio Olympics. And she, if you can see this picture on the screen, this is a time trial position. So it's extremely awkward. You're leaned over in a very aerodynamic position, but it hurts the shoulders, it kind of hurts your elbows. It's not comfortable on your lower back, but it's the fastest position that we currently know. And so she would be in this position, but her hips would always slide down on her saddle, her bike saddle, and she would constantly have to be readjusting. And also her hips, her PSIS was shifting so much in each pedal stroke. And so she would get some massive pain in her lower back after each race. And so this was obviously affecting her aerodynamics and causing an energy leak because she wasn't able to, not all of her energy was going to the pedals, it was going to repositioning. So ultimately, we really wanted to decrease or help with her metabolic and mechanical efficiency by strengthening her pelvic floor. Her core stability, so that she could stay in an isometric hold on her elbows in this position and help maintain her pelvis without having an energy leak there. So I worked with her with this, and there was a significant difference within 6 months leading into the Olympics, where she didn't move as much on her bike, and she had decreased pain after her time trial. And we don't know how it really affected her performance. In elite athletes, it could be marginal gains. It could be 2 seconds that she improved as a result of this. But that 2 seconds could be the difference between being on the podium and just a mere finishing result. So that when you're working with that special population, you need to analyze, okay, what are common energy leaks? What will help in metabolic and mechanical efficiency? For you, this might be progressing or regressing an individual based on their movement efficiency. That you might identify that an individual has energy leaks or improper movement patterns in a certain exercise, so you would regress them and get them to become proficient in that basic movement pattern and then progress them appropriately. So the regression progression is a way to target movement inefficiencies and therefore energy leaks. All right, now let's move into the overview. So remember, this is the principles of anaerobic exercise prescription. We targeted the number 1 and number 2 in week 6. Now we're working on, for this week's content, training frequency, exercise order, training load and repetitions, volume, and rest periods. So let's get started. So let's move into our first training frequency consideration, and that's training status. So remember, you've classified your client based on their history of exercise as a beginner, intermediate, or advanced. Now, if you're unsure of where to classify them, it's better to classify them lower and then progress them accordingly. Okay, it's better to err on the side of caution and progress them faster than classify them as higher and then have to regress. Okay, so training status affects the number of rest days needed between sessions. And ideally, a frequency of 3 times per week is recommended for many athletes to allow sufficient recovery between sessions. So this is 3 weeks of anaerobic-based training. And really, this is dependent on the phase of training. So each phase of training will allow for different amounts of anaerobic-based training. This is also dependent on your needs analysis and whether anaerobic training is a KPI for that sport. So highly resistance trained athletes, intermediate or advanced, can augment or increase their training by using a split routine, which we'll talk about on the forthcoming slides, in which different muscle groups are trained on different days. And this allows for a higher amount of training frequency for resistance-based training. So here's a table that I took right out of the National Strength and Conditioning Association textbook on strength and conditioning specialist. Here we have training status and the frequency guidelines of sessions per week. So as a beginner, there's 2 to 3 sessions. Intermediate is 2 to 4, and advanced is anywhere between 4 to 7. And this seems like a lot for advanced, up to 7. But what we're talking about is a split routine where you're not working the same muscle group each day, that you could be working biceps and chest on one day and then back and legs on another day. So you're alternating. And so that's where you could get that higher frequency. But this is for an advanced individual. It's not necessarily recommended. It really depends on the KPFs, the key performance factors or indicators of that sport. And there's multiple factors. One being training status, the phase of training, whether it's a sport athlete, if they're just a recreational athlete, if it's just based on physical activity, what their occupation is. And really the question becomes that you have to determine in your needs analysis is how strong does your client need to be? Based on their age, their goals, all of these factors, based on their sport, their occupation, how strong does the individual need to be? For an endurance-based athlete, resistance training, they don't need to be that strong in their upper body. It's just more to minimize energy leaks from movement of their upper body and to keep balance in the body. So it may not be a focus. So in that case, you may only do resistance training a few times a week for the upper body, maybe different for the lower body. But these are considerations that you need to explore when you're creating a plan for your specific client. Now let's look at some examples of common split routines. So here we have 3 examples on this chart. The first one, which is above the blue rectangle, is 2 days of different types of training. So it's a 2-day rotation. We have lower body and upper body. So Sunday we have a rest, Monday is lower body, Tuesday is upper body, then Wednesday is a rest, Thursday is lower body, Friday is upper body, and then a rest. So the actual resistance training frequency is 4 times per week with 2 days of rest. The next, which is highlighted in the blue rectangle, is a 3-day split. So we have chest, shoulders, and triceps on day 1, followed by lower body on day 2. Day 3 is back, trapezius, and biceps. So we have rest day Sunday. Monday we hit it with chest, shoulders, triceps. Tuesday is lower body. Wednesday is back, trapezius, and biceps. Thursday is another rest day, and then we repeat. So this is 5 days per week with 2 days of rest. The last example is below the rectangle, and we have a 3-day rotation, but now we only have 1 day of rest. So we've taken out a day of rest. So that means the frequency is higher. So we have chest and back, followed by lower body the next day. Then the next day is shoulders and arms, 1 rest day midweek on a Wednesday, and then we have chest and back, lower body, shoulders, and arms. So this allows for 6 days of resistance training per week with 1 day rest. This is common split routines that allows you to get that frequency up to possibly 7 for an advanced lifter. Remember, anywhere between 4 to 7 times per week for a frequency of resistance training is more for an advanced, classified as an advanced resistance training individual. This could either be for an athlete or for a general pop who wants to get strong. Now let's consider the training frequency based on the time of a sports season. So the sports season really dictates how much or the frequency of resistance training. So seasonal demands of the sport may limit the time available for resistance training because the focus is the sport and sport performance. It's not about how you perform in the gym. When it comes to the season, it's performing on the field of play that counts the most. So on table, we have table here 17.6 that comes out of the NSCA textbook, where it's resistance training frequency based on the sport season. And this is for a trained athlete. So they're considered an advanced based on training status of resistance training. So the off season has a higher frequency, so 4 to 6 times per week. The preseason is 3 to 4 times. In season is 1 to 3 times, and this is because the focus is the sport in the field of play, so there's less focus on the gym. Instead, it's about maintaining the benefits that you require or you attained in the preseason and off season. And then the postseason, it's 1 to 3 times. And really the focus here is active rest. So you want to ensure that you're allowing for that active rest of the neuromuscular system and about the metabolic system and not stressing it with added resistance training. So as you can see here, the sports season is very important in driving the frequency of resistance training sessions. So a few more points about training frequency. First of all, athletes who train near max or near max loads require more recovery time before their next training session. Well, why? And you should be able to answer this. And you could pause this right now and try to answer that question. And it comes down to the physiological stress on the system and the physiological adaptations that you're trying to attain. If you want to stress the system, you have to stress the central nervous system, the peripheral nervous system, above what it normally operates in training to get a greater stress and therefore an adaptation. Okay, remember, the stress dictates the adaptation. You want to ensure that you're getting a great enough stress beyond what they're normally accustomed to in order to drive a change. Otherwise, you're going to see slow progressions in performance or changes as a result. And this is called the monotony of training, that you're going to get that submax training all the time because they're chronically fatigued or doing too much volume. So how can you assess how fresh your client is? Well, one way I've done it in the past to assess neuromuscular fatigue is a fairly basic rudimentary test known as the vertical jump test, where an individual just does a vertical jump against a wall where there's a measuring tape in a valid and reliable way, with minimizing intra and intra-tester differences. So what you can see is if there's a decline in their max vertical jump day after day of training, this provides a reliable indication of neuromuscular fatigue. And what the cutoff is usually if you see a 10% drop from their max vertical jump, this is an indication of neuromuscular fatigue. So Sandy arrives to training. You know what her max vertical jump is. She's 10% less than that on that given day. Then you may choose to do something that's more of an active recovery day and postpone that maximal effort day to when she's actually more recovered. Alternatively, you could use subjective feedback, asking your client, how are you feeling? How'd you sleep? And this needs to be done on a continual basis and logged. So develop a log to see how fatigued your client is over time. If you see that their fatigue is increasing, then you need to give them more rest. So you want to plan those max training session days where you want to really stress the neuromuscular system after a rest or a recovery day to maximize those max efforts. Maximize the max efforts. To me, this seems like common sense, but evaluate the program that you're doing with your varsity team, with an outside team. The majority of programs are not like this, and they're not asking you how you're feeling and modifying training based on subjective feedback. And it's hard to do that in a team-based setting, but it's important to, especially when you're doing anaerobic quality work. Frequency is influenced by the overall amount of physical stress and the goals of the program. Those are two things that are very, very important. How much physical stress is placed on the body, and what are your goals of the program? So you want to consider other effects as well, being whether you're prescribing aerobic or anaerobic training besides resistance training. What's the sport skill practice? So if you have practices involved, if you're in season or preseason, the timing required for practices will dictate, how much frequency you can allocate to resistance training in a week. Physically demanding occupations are extremely important as well. If an individual is a construction worker and they're lifting heavy machinery all day, this may change up how much frequency they will be in the gym or for resistance training, because their occupation is demanding on the musculoskeletal system. Travel, life stress, nutrition can go in favor or not in favor of changes. And lastly, poor sleep. All these factors need to be considered when you're creating a plan of training frequency and you're determining how frequent the individual should be doing resistance-based training. The next step is to consider the resistance training exercise order, which is the sequence of resistance exercises performed during one training session. So there's 4 considerations that we're going to talk about for exercise order. The first consideration is that you place power-based exercises before other non-power core-based exercises, then assistance exercises. So power exercises are those of the snatch, hang clean, power clean, and push jerk, and they should be performed first in a training session. Well, why? First of all, let's define what power is. It's generating force as quickly as possible, so it has a time factor. You don't just have to generate force, you need to generate force as fast as possible. So we have a huge neuromuscular load placed on the body when we're doing power-based exercises. So power exercises or core exercises that are done as quickly as possible. So the power-based exercise happen first in a training session. Then they're followed by non-power core exercises. Then they're followed by assistant exercises where you have some sort of assistance like machine-based exercises. And why is this so? Because of neuromuscular fatigue. The power-based exercises stress the neuromuscular system so much that you don't want to be doing these at the end of a session when you're already fatigued. You want to be as fresh as possible to do power-based work, and as such, you want to make sure that your training session is ordered appropriately with power-based exercises first, then non-power core, then assistance exercises. That's the first consideration. Here's an examples of the order. So remember, we start with our power exercises, which are the snatch, the hang clean, the power clean, the push press. All of these are power-based exercises where you have a time component. You're trying to move a force as fast as possible or generate force as fast as possible to overcome the load. Then you follow those in a training session by non-power core exercises. So these are the multi-joint, there's no power or time component to them, and they're core exercises, not like your abdominal core. I'm saying that they're core body fundamental exercises. So some examples of these are like the front squat, the back squat, the deadlift, which uses multiple joints, the pull-up, the chin-up. All of these are using multiple muscle groups and multiple joints at once, and they're considered core exercises. Then the third thing you would follow in a training session is your assistance exercises. These are exercises where you're either using assistance or you're isolating a specific joint. So in this case, like a bicep curl, a tricep extension, where you're either using dumbbells or cables, you're isolating one joint for the most part, one muscle group. So in this case, these are called assistance exercises, and these can be done when you are relatively fatigued, neuromuscularly fatigued, after you've done your power and non-power core exercises. Now let's work through an example. So the question is, put the following exercises in the proper exercise order for the workout. So we have 2 different boxes here. We have a blue box and a yellow box, and I want you to do that for each of them. So the first thing is classify the exercise. Is it a power-based exercise? Is it non-power core or assistance? And then number 2, put them in the order that the exercises should be for each of these 2 workouts, the blue workout and the yellow workout. And you should pause the session right now and do this on your own. Okay, so let's work on the blue box. What would be a core exercise is the back squat, the bench press, and that's it. Okay, then the hang clean would be the power-based exercise. The hamstring curl and the tricep push down are assistance exercises. So the proper order that you would place this in, you start with the power, so the hang clean, followed by a back squat and bench press, followed by a tricep push down and a hamstring curl. And that would be considered the proper exercise order. Okay, and then on the far side, we would start with the split squats, then the pull-ups, then deadlifts, chest flies, and hip at abduction. So the order at which you put the core exercises, if there's multiple of them, is under your discretion based on the load and how hard they are. You want to put the most difficult exercises at the closer to the beginning of the workout, and then for the core exercises, if there's multiple of them, followed by the easier ones. One method of providing the opportunity for individuals to recover more fully between exercises is to alternate upper body exercises and lower body exercises. And this is our second consideration for exercise order. An example of this would be a back squat followed immediately by bench press, followed by a hamstring curl, and then a bicep curl. So you're alternating between lower body to upper body, lower body to upper body. And so we have minimal rest periods in between. We can keep the heart rate heightened. And this is a form of endurance training as well. And this is the root of most circuit training, is that you alternate upper and lower body, allowing minimal rest because you're alternating the muscle groups, and you're allowing a lot of exercises to get done in a short period of time. So another example of manipulating exercise order or consideration for exercise order is alternating push and pull exercises. So we can have a bench press, which is a push exercise, a shoulder press is a push, and a tricep extension is you're pushing down. And you alternate those with pulling exercises, such as a lat pull down or a pull up that you can do with a bar. A bent over row is actually you're pulling the dumbbell to yourself. And the bicep curl is a pulling movement. So you can alternate these in a workout as well. A push, a pull, a push, pull. That's a common exercise order manipulation. A lower body example of push-pull is the push of a back squat followed by a deadlift, which is a pull from the ground up. Now let's work through another example of exercise order. In this case, we have two types of exercise sessions below in yellow and one in blue, and you want to alternate the push-pull in these examples. So pause the session right now and try to do this on your own. So in the first one in yellow, we would first of all do incline bench press, followed by pull-ups. Both of these are core exercises. Then you would do a military press that's using a machine, followed by lat pull downs, which is an assistance exercise where you're isolating the lats. The second example in blue, the order would be Bulgarian split squats, stiff leg deadlifts, where the split squats is a push from the ground up, stiff leg deadlifts is a pull, front squats is a push, hamstring curls is a pull using assistance, and calf raises usually use assistance, and in this case it would be the last exercise that you do. So you're alternating between push-pull in both of these examples. The fourth consideration for exercise order is something called supersets or compound sets. A superset involves two sequentially performed exercises that stress two opposing muscles or muscle areas, an agonist and its antagonist. So let's look at an example. This would be bench press followed by a lat pull down, where bench press isolates the chest and lat pull down isolates the back muscles. Or split squat and a deadlift. Split squat isolates mostly the rec fem and the quad, and then the deadlift uses the posterior chain. Then, for example, a compound set involves sequentially performing two different exercises for the same muscle group. So that's a compound set. This would be lat pull downs followed by pull-ups, or bench press followed by push-ups. Here are two examples of little activities that I would like you to work on yourself. So you can pause it right now and work through these yourself. I'm going to talk through them right now. So first of all, create a superset for the lower body with 6 exercises. There's many ways you can do this. No way is right, but the order is right. So a superset, again, is alternating muscle groups so that you do it sequentially. In this example, I would provide a split squat and a deadlift, a front squat and a hamstring curl, a calf raise, and a hamstring curl on a physio ball. So that would be 3 supersets of 2 exercises, a total of 6 exercises for that little workout, all focusing on the lower body. One on the anterior chain, one on the posterior chain. The second example here is create a compound set for the upper body with 6 exercises. So typically I would split it again, 3 compound sets of 2 exercises. So incline dumbbell press and a push-up. Then I would do pull-ups and a seated row to isolate the back. Then a machine double arm bicep curl. So using a machine, this is assisted. And then dumbbell standing bicep curl. Okay, so you might want to flip that order, but that would be ultimately an example of compound where you're isolating that same muscle group with 2 sequentially performed exercises. I want you to look at this example of an off-season soccer resistance training program. I just pulled it off the internet. So on Monday is lower body, Tuesday is upper body, Wednesday is a rest, and then Thursday and Friday. The first question I have for you is what type of exercise order is used over the week? Okay, I want you to answer that now. The second question is what type of exercise order is used within each individual session? And I want you to answer that now. So for the first one, we see for over the week, we see an upper body and a lower body format, upper lower body split. Okay, with 1 day of rest. So this 4 times per week with 1 day of rest. I'm not sure what's happening on the weekend, on Saturday and Sunday. I would assume there's nothing going on. So that's 3 days of rest, 4 days of resistance training with an upper and lower body format. For the second question, what type of exercise order is used? Well, for the individual sessions, exercises are ordered by a push-pull format. We see a power clean, followed by a front squat, and then we have a leg curl, which is a pull, followed by a calf press. And the same goes for the second day, which we can see bench press followed by a lat pull down, shoulder press followed by a bicep curl, and then we have crunches. In summary so far, resistance training frequency is dependent on training status, the time of the sport season, the sport, the occupation and activity, and the needs and demand analysis, and the type of training if you're doing max or near max reps. And there are 4 types of resistance training exercise order that should be considered. One is power exercises, to core exercises, to assistance exercises. You can then do either an alternating upper body and lower body. You can alternate push and pull between days and or do supersets or compound sets within each given individual session.